Mr. Bevel, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, Jeffrey Hurd.
Excellent. Thank you.
How are you?
I am doing very well.
How is
Had a
your...
very restful 2 days.
I am glad to hear it. Um, what was I was gonna... I had a crazy dream last... Oh, wait, since it's just the two of us, and you can be bored by my dream. I had a dream about a carnivorous banana that was...
Oh, that was a good omen, not a bad omen. You were right to summon me here.
Hello, Alicia. Hello,
Hi.
Marilyn.
How is your eye doing, Alicia?
Oh, a lot better. A lot
That
better.
is great to hear.
Yeah, it took a couple days though to go down. I was really surprised. But yeah, I ended up going to, the doctor, and I got an ointment to put on the spot. So
Nice.
Alicia, is this a toothpick holder?
I don't know. I got it when I was a child.
Oh.
Let me plug in here. My mother worked in London in World War II. You know, she went up as part of the war effort to work for the Admiralty, which is what we probably call the Department of the Navy. And so whenever we were stationed overseas, we somehow my mother would wangle in a stop in London, and my dad was a huge Dickens fan. I mean, his favorite author was Dickens. So of course we had to go to the old curiosity shop, which at that time was still an antique shop.
Oh.
So yeah, and it's all by itself. I went there, more recently with my husband, and it's the only little, Elizabethan house, and everything else is all modern. It's still there. It's now a shoe shop, but yeah, it might have been, it could have been for anything, maybe matches.
It does
Sticks, I don't know.
fits the same form factor as Ruby Flash glassware from that time.
Okay.
I got my mom a toothpick holder of the same size.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you said that your favorite Dickens was the Old Curiosity Shop, I thought, well, and then the Budley Sollerton place, I've been there. My cousin, well, it's actually my mother's cousin, but he's pretty close in age to me. Colin lives near there. And it's nice to walk around. There's a nudist beach there. And it's kind of very Noel Coward. I think actually
I don't
Noel
imagine
Coward.
Noel Coward in the nude often, so that is interesting.
Leslie, were you kicked out of the house?
Oh, I'm actually enjoying the fire. Can you see the fire?
No, but I believe that it's.
Yeah, if I keep talking, I think I can. Like, can you see the fire? It's one of those chimney things.
Yeah. Nice.
Very
I
fancy
have.
chimney.
It was about $100 on Amazon. Yeah, it's really nice.
You look very cozy with your...
And I've got my patriotic red, white, and blue cowl and hat on.
Is that what that is?
Yeah.
Well, we have our patio set up, though we're not using it at the moment, but we have it set up for winter.
Oh, I can send you the link if you're interested. It's
it's
very small.
Thank you. I have a fire pit, and I also have 3 propane heaters.
Okay, no, we just have a terrace. We're in a little townhouse community. There's just a dozen.
Nice.
So it had to be pretty small.
We just periodically burn a neighbor to make sure the crops come back. So that's what we do.
All right.
I'm going to give it a couple more minutes to see if a few other people join us. Thank you for those of you who are here tonight. I'm very excited to see you. And I will just give you a preview. Huh? Oh.
Hi, Janet.
So a preview quickly. I'm going to, there are 2 pieces or 2 paragraphs from Hilary Mantel that I want to share with the group. I have hypothetical I want us to be angry about. And then I got some questions that I was going to pose to everyone, and we could sort of launch there. Yes, for a boy Woolsey. But let's wait one more moment.
I'd rather be here than listening to the news.
Yeah, dare I ask how everybody's doing, or do we not want to go there?
I'm feeling a lot better now than I was
There's no there.
4 hours ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True, but oh,
Let's not go there tonight. Let's get away
Okay.
from that.
Yeah.
I do have to say, I was watching until about 10 o'clock last night and I said, not worth it, go to bed.
Me too. That's when I turned it off.
Very
Well,
sensitive.
I went to bed at 11 and couldn't sleep, so I have not slept since in the past 24 hours.
you know, I went to bed like
Every
it.
me falling asleep. Hope I won't now, but it's been a long time since I've had some sleep.
Well,
I took a Pepsid. I went to bed like, midnight, woke up at 3:30 with this stomach that, and couldn't get back to sleep. Oh,
Oh, I think everybody's going to sleep better tonight.
I hope so.
Oh, I drank a lot. That helped.
Yeah, I had a glass
I
of
drank a
wine.
lot, but not enough. And I was up till like 2 a.m. Pacific, which was,
Holy moly.
it turned out to be.
You don't even live here.
I know, and I don't even live here.
You
But,
got
I'm with you all in spirit.
well, my wife has a very dear friend who lives in Italy, who's from Italy, and she was telling us how she was so happy for us. And I'm saying to my wife, I don't know what she's happy about yet. I hope she's right,
Yeah.
For the best.
Oh.
but it does look like the 4-year nightmare might be coming to an end.
Oh God, I hope so.
All right, well, let's talk about a different nightmare. Let's talk
Yeah.
about, how is that for a transition, by the way? Pretty smooth,
Pretty good.
right?
Very
Yeah.
smooth.
Nice segue.
Thank you. So I want to share and I will send these in the follow-up email. Hilary Mantel a few years ago gave a series of lectures. They're either the Wreath lectures or the Wreath lectures. I'm not sure.
Michael, can you get a little
Reese.
closer to the mic? I can't hear you.
Oh, sure. I will move this
That
closer.
is great. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Much better.
All right. So she starts by saying, Saint Augustine says, the dead are invisible. They are not absent. You needn't believe in ghosts to see that's true. We carry the genes and the culture of our ancestors, and what we think about them shapes what we think of ourselves, how we make sense of our time and place. Okay. If people could, mute yourselves if you're not talking, and then come off mute when you want to talk. The other thing I would ask is if you have, if you want to say something, type me in the chat, and then I'll know to call on you when we get to that point. So let me go back to what I was saying though. We carry the genes and the culture of our ancestors, and what we think about them shapes what we think of ourselves and how we make sense of our time and place. Are these good times, bad times, interesting times? We rely on history to tell us. History and science too help us put our small lives in context. But if we want to meet the dead looking alive, we turn to art. So that's the first thing I wanted to share. I just think that's a very profound statement. And then the next thing that I will share with you from that lecture is evidence is always partial. Facts are not truth, though they are part of it. Information is not knowledge, and history is not the past. It is the method we have evolved of organizing our ignorance of the past. It's the record of what's left on the record. It's the plan of the positions taken when we to, when we to stop the dance to note. Let me try that sentence in English this time, folks. It's the plan of the positions taken when we to stop the dance to note them down. It's what's left in the sieve when the centuries have run through it, a few stones, scraps of writing, scraps of cloth. It is no more the past than a birth certificate is a birth, or a script is a performance, or a map is a journey. It is the multiplication of the evidence of fallible and biased witnesses, combined with incomplete accounts of actions not fully understood by the people who perform them. It's no more than the best we can do, and often it falls short of that. So, those two things. The upsetting hypothetical I want us to think about, and I'm sorry, it's going to get just a tiny bit political, but we're not going to. Something that occurred to me is the 16th century was 500 years ago. So let's pretend that books of some kind are 500 years in the future. And someone writes a book called Capitol Street, and it's about Lindsey Graham. And that writer does for Lindsey Graham what Mantell is doing for Cromwell. I just would like you to sit with that, because Cromwell is easy to fall in love with the way that Mantell writes him. And I'm not saying that she's not writing him well. I do think that we need to be careful in saying that she's writing him correctly. And there were a lot of people who did not have a good opinion of Thomas Cromwell. And I wonder what people in the 16th century would make of a novel like Wolf Hall. And sorry, Anne. I'm just curious, you know, what they would have made of our this sort of Thomas Cromwell renaissance and this recontextualization of him as a person. All right. So I did those two things. And then what would be better? So Michael, I see you have a comment you want to make. So I will turn to you before I turn to the questions that were submitted.
Thank you. First off, I really like the first part of the first quote. And after I finish, I'm hoping you might reread it.
Okay.
And that's the part about the dead still being with us. And I am in complete agreement about that. And not in the sense of some, you know, supernatural phenomenon. I think that as the quote continued, it was very clear about the idea of the genetic part of it and the memory part of it and so forth. So I think that it's true in this. That was really kind of cool, actually. I like the quote. I'll jump next to the Lindsey Graham piece. So before anyone jumps on me and accuses me of being a supporter of Lindsey Graham, I am not. I find him somewhat despicable, but there are certain aspects of him that I find interesting and likable. So I could certainly see a future person writing about Lindsey Graham in a way that would make him a sympathetic character. There are times when he knocks it out of the park when he's speaking, and you say, wow, that's freaking awesome. He's really on our side. But then he goes and blows it somewhere else, and that's more often than not the case. And most recent example being his dealing with Amy Coney Barrett in terms of, oh yeah, quote me on that. It's not going to happen again, but then it does.
Yeah.
but you know, and I can't think of any specific examples of this, but there have been times when he's said things or taken positions, and I said, that is the right way to be. And thank goodness you're doing that. And I really appreciate that. The problem is he doesn't stick to it. And he's all over the place, and he's just looking to kiss whichever ass happens to be in his face. That's it.
There's more to that sentence than you realize based on what we know about Lindsey Graham's personal life. So, Anne, you had raised your hand too.
Well, you had posed this question several times since we started about what is history and how do we write history, and Mantell in the paragraphs plural that you were reading address that. And there's one of these chapters in book 3 where it's told that Henry hires scholars to write a history of England. But you can imagine the kind of history of England they're going to write to be on Henry's good side, that history is written from the point of view of the historian or the scribe. And that came up a few times during that section of the book about how we approach history. That was all.
Thank you, Anne. Shona, you had. Yes.
Thanks, Mike. I found that question about Lindsey Graham really provocative and really thought-provoking. And I'm going to shoot over that one for a bit. And part of me feels if somebody can create great art out of Lindsey Graham's life 500 years in the future, when we will all be dead and gone, long dead and gone, then maybe Lindsey Graham's life will have been worth living. One of the, I would like to, has anybody here read American Wife by Curtis Sittenfeld? Which is a really interesting book. It's a novelization of the life, is it Barbara or is it Laura Bush?
It's Barbara Bush, isn't it?
It's one of the first ladies.
Barbara Bush.
Who I never liked at all until I read that novel, and suddenly I found her to be a very sympathetic character. And then I had the opposite experience when I read Rodham, because I love Hilary Rodham. And I didn't like her in the book that Curtis Sittenfeld wrote. So I think there's some interesting parallels here about, real people in art. And I'm not really drawing to a conclusion, but I'm just saying if people want to explore that further, I would really recommend those 2 books by Curtis Sittenfeld.
And one thing that I want to, just to add some color to what you said, Shona, and then I will let Marion speak. One of the things that historical fiction and science fiction allow us to do is to explore concepts and sometimes unlikable people and concepts with a distance, because it's not happening to us today. So we today, if we think about a positive spin on Lindsey Graham, we think, okay, Mike, you're a Meshuggah. But if we think about Thomas Cromwell, because we've got 500 years of distance and we don't have any stake in his goodness or badness, he's just at this point to us a figure in history. Then it's a little easier for us to be comfortable recontextualizing. So I think it's that tragedy plus time equals comedy formula that will apply to history. Marion. Oh, Marion, you'll need to come off of mute.
Thanks for that reminder. I think this ties back into what Mantle says about, if you want to explore the dead, that's art, because what we know about Thomas Cromwell is just a set of facts. We don't really know, he's not flesh and blood, and she really makes him flesh and blood. And in terms of like 500 years, Lindsey Graham, we'll know certain things about him, but the historians of that time, he won't be a whole personality. And when you were talking about this, it just reminded me of a little section in the book when Cromwell's son Gregory is reading the life of Arthur. And he says, like, some of the stories are true and some aren't true, but they're good stories anyway. So, you know, that's them looking back in history, and that same thing is happening to them. So
an interesting, so I spent the week sort of just doing a bunch of random Google searches about Cromwell and Tudor history. And I came up like a new set of complaints that is arising about Mantell's portrait of Cromwell is her treatment of Gregory Cromwell. She sort of gives us what I would say is a typical pampered teen to young adult. He doesn't seem to have a lot of intelligence or depth, but I don't think Mantell is saying that about Gregory. I think she is describing what Cromwell would think of Gregory, because Gregory doesn't appear to be the go-getter that someone like a Rafe Sadler would be. So it just reminded me again how important it is to remember the context of the book is this is Cromwell's mind that we are inside. And these are Cromwell's points of view. They're not necessarily history's point of view. And that's just what we're left with. Anne Bennett, again, please. You also might be on mute.
No, I unmuted. I was just thinking of the different portrayals of Cromwell and Thomas More in Mantell and in A Man for All Seasons. They're, I mean, Cromwell is our hero here, and he is not very likable in Man for All Seasons, and the reverse is true of More. So, and they're both more or less historical fiction, but a lot of liberties.
Michael Kraft. Michael Kraft.
Coming. Had to find the right place to click. I like the portrayal of Cromwell in the book. Maybe it's the lawyer in me. I don't know. I find his creativity and his ingenuity to be refreshing. I also deeply, I was trying to find a quote the last couple of days. I've been both reading it and listening to it on audiobooks. And let me just say, in reading it, I have a great deal of difficulty keeping track of who is speaking. Mantell, in her written work, doesn't do a great job of stopping where one person finishes speaking and then starting again where the next person speaks, of explaining who's the talker. And I have to go over it again and again. And actually, the audiobook makes it a little easier because the people doing the narration change their voices depending on who is speaking. And so it's a little easier to follow. But I was in the car listening to it as I was driving, and there was a line, and I've been going back to try to find it in the written book, that described Cromwell's position, where he is sort of caught in the middle between his love of Wolsey and his wanting to please Henry. Forgive me. What was your question, Mike? Because I'm leading up to the answer to your question. Sorry.
I don't think I had a question. I was just making the point that Gregory is.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yes. Okay. So I perceive Gregory. It's interesting because my son's name is Gregory. I perceive Gregory, I perceive Cromwell's perception of Gregory as being focused on the fact that Gregory did not have to live through the crap that Thomas Cromwell had to live through as he was growing up. And so, yes, I think there's a perception and a description of Gregory as being a much more innocent sort of child, but it's a function, I think, of what Thomas Cromwell had to go through in his upbringing.
Very good. I'm going to turn to some of the questions that people sent in and that we could talk about. And the first one I'm really interested, because I think this is going to be a good discussion. The path that Cromwell takes to get himself into Henry's presence, which is, I think, very interesting and really speaks to his ability to think quickly on his feet, especially the scene where Henry has a dream and Cromwell interprets it for him correctly. I don't know. Dreams are tough too. I was telling Jeff I had a dream about a carnivorous banana that was eating a reptile. What does it mean? I don't know. And let's not talk about that right now. What I do want to say is his ability to think quickly on his feet and his ability to know pretty instantaneously what someone's angle is and what it is that they want out of the situation, I think gives Cromwell and the novel an upper hand often. But what are other people's thoughts about the way Cromwell ends up sort of the next Wolsey? Jeff, I see your hand up.
Well, just to describe the feeling I have when I'm reading Cromwell being very good at reading the room or reading everyone's angles is it's sort of like a weird play on what the author is doing as well, which is it seems as though he already knows a lot of the broad strokes of of the history that has yet to come, sort of like he's a time traveler who's traveled back into his own life with knowledge of the future and can sort of, find the path he wants through it that will at least turn out the best for him, although maybe not for his family.
All right. Phyllis, you had raised your hand.
I think Cromwell is amazing. I mean, he's just an extraordinary figure. He's like the quintessential Renaissance man. He knows everything. He knows everyone. He's so smart that he can pick up on subtle cues from people. He keeps his, finger in every pie. He can speak Spanish and Greek, and he can fix the cataract in a favorite dog's eye. He can cost out a costume. I mean, and he does it, since we're in his head, he does it in a way that, I mean, I love him. I don't know why other people don't. I mean, because he's not like bragging about it. He's just doing it. And he's doing it to make a life for himself. He's not doing it to prove a point, I think, but he's remembers everything. And I mean, he's Wolsey's true son in that sense. And the affection between them is very moving. As far as his attitude towards Gregory, I think it's charming that he appreciates Gregory for who he is, it seems. He's not like a helicopter parent trying to make him, I mean, he sends him to college and he doesn't do well, but he still loves him and he still understands what his strengths are, and those aren't his strengths. It seems like he wants him to get those skills because those are the skills that are needed, but he doesn't put him down for not having them. He's not a punitive father. And what I also find interesting is the view of Henry VIII, which is very different than the classic view of Henry VIII is, you know, this simple womanizer wife acquiring. I mean, he's a very thoughtful, accomplished person, and he's in a way driven by his need to try and maintain the kingdom with an heir. So he takes seriously the divine right of kings, even if they've only been on that track for a little while, the Tudors. So anyway, I love the language and I love the book, and since I listened to it the first time, I am completely blown away by the things that I missed in it and appreciating reading it so much. And now I don't know if I have to go back and read all the books that I've been listening to. I hope I live a long time.
You will.
Anyway.
Shona, you had said something.
Yeah, so I love the way that Henry, as we see him through Cromwell's eyes, changes. So the very first encounter they have, Henry is described like you know, a steamroller or a thunderstorm or, you know, some kind of amazing force of nature, and Cromwell is kind of just stunned into. And it's one of the few times I think we see Cromwell really on the back foot, because the presence, the overwhelming presence of kind of the seat of all the power in the nation. And I think about, because I like to draw parallels, if any of you have watched, for example, Jessica Jones, the uber villain in Jessica Jones is somebody who has the power to make anybody do whatever he wants. And he's had that power his whole life, and he cannot but be a villain, because there is no way to have the power to get everybody to do what you want and not turn into, you know, not become evil. And Henry, although he didn't grow up as the Prince of Wales, has had that power for a long time now. And I just, you know, I love kind of Cromwell's reaction to him, which is sort of total overwhelm. And of course, as he gets to know Henry better, we do as well. But does he ever lose sight of, you know, you mustn't let the lion know how strong he is, but does he ever lose sight? And maybe that's one of his fatal flaws, that at some point he does lose sight of Henry's ultimate power and the fact that there are really no checks on that. And, you know, going back to Jeffrey's point about how Cromwell reads everybody around him, one of the things that I find really interesting about reading this is, I think it's really hard for us, or it's really hard for me, to tell how much were people in the past like us. Did they have psychological pictures? Did they have concepts of mind, of other people's motivations and fears and doubts? You know, I think Cromwell comes across as a very, like, as he's depicted in this book, as a very modern person. Like he's somebody I want to meet and hang out with and be friends with. But his attitude to women, his attitude towards education, his attitude to exercising power, his attitude to, you know, the peasantry, his attitude to religion, they're all super modern. And I don't suppose that the real Cromwell held half of those views. But I'd also be really, can Cromwell's models of how other people think and behave, which he uses to inform his own behavior in his own passage, could they even exist in somebody who was growing up and living in that time? Like, I don't really have a good sense of whether that's even a realistic thing that could have happened.
There is a book that I would, if you're just curious, it's a fascinating book by a man named Julian Jaynes, called The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. I will send that in an email so you don't have to worry about scribbling it down. But he explores this idea that the brain had to develop consciousness, and consciousness is a fairly recent development in humans. And so your question about would people think the way we think in the 1500s is a very valid one, because we know a little how they talked, because letters capture that a little bit. And we know a little bit how they think, because again, letters capture that. But there are some subtleties of psychology that we probably do miss, or that probably weren't present then, that are present now. And Mantell is reading into the record for us.
Unless, of course, that was Cromwell's superpower. He had a modern thinking.
Yeah, they could have been.
Nobody else around him did.
Several people have asked me to do this. I'm going to do this right now, and then I'm going to go back because I see that there are other people with things to say. So let me just do this quickly. I'm going to reread Hilary Mantel's quote about how the dead are invisible. St. Augustine says the dead are invisible. They are not absent. You needn't believe in ghosts to see that's true. We carry the genes and the culture of our ancestors, and what we think about them shapes what we think of ourselves, and how we make sense of our time and place. Are these good times, bad times, interesting times? We rely on history to tell us. History and science too help us put our small lives in context. But if we want to meet the dead looking alive, we turn to art. All right. Let's see. Alicia, you would wanted to go next.
Yes. I think my original request to speak was based on the question you had earlier. I think Cromwell learned at the hands of a master with Wolsey, but also he's already lived so many different lives.
Yes.
He's had so many different careers. And what's clear from his point of view, and this sort of references Shona's question, is he a modern man? I think Phyllis is right. He is a Renaissance man. He's a European. These other people are not Europeans. This man has lived and worked in Italy, France, the Low Countries, and he's been with incredibly powerful, money savvy people, but he's gone back home, and I mean, they're not exactly barbarians, but they're pretty rough around the edges compared to, the Holy Roman Empire.
Thank you, Alicia. Someone had asked in the chat, how exactly does Cromwell get enough access to Henry to become his confidant? So I will give you my point of view, and then if other people, it's going to be, for this time, raise your hand and I will try to look for you if you want to say something to this question, and then I'll move on to people who wanted to make points. But he does it by always being around. So one of the things that happens as soon as Wolsey falls and has to flee, Cromwell remains in Henry's presence because he's worried. Well, he says he's worried that if he should leave to go back to Wolsey, rumors will spread and he won't be there to protect the king at all. So I think being there all the time, and also the fact that Henry knows that Cromwell is Wolsey's creature, and we know that Henry in the novel harbors a love for Wolsey that he's not always public about, but we do see him at some points get angry when people speak poorly of Wolsey. And we do see Henry say kind words about him. So I think that's it. Michael, you had raised your hand, and then Tom, I see your hand up, so I'll go to you afterwards.
Thank you. First of all, I'm going to read a quote that I highlighted and had already up on my iPad screen in front of me about the very thing that you're talking about. And this is on page 206 of my ebook. It says, and this is in quotes, "People have worked to make misunderstandings between us." This is Cromwell speaking about him and Wolsey. "People have worked to," and he's talking, I think, to Cranmer. "People have worked to make misunderstandings between us, to persuade the cardinal that I'm not working for his interests, only for my own, that I have been bought out, that I see Anne every day." Cranmer says, "Of course you do see her." Cromwell continues, "How else can I know how to move next? My lord cannot know. He cannot," lord being Wolsey, "my lord cannot know. He cannot understand what it's like here now." Cranmer says gently, "Should you not go to him? Your presence would dispel any doubt." And Cromwell answers, "There's no time. The snare is set for him. I dare not move." So I think that encapsulates exactly the thought you just had. My response to your question essentially is, one which I put in the chat box to you privately, which is this. I have a huge problem about the fact that Cromwell, who is as I understand it, a strong supporter of the Protestant Reform movement, is nevertheless enthralled by Wolsey. He's sort of become his right-hand man at various points, his confidant and so forth, and has a great deal of respect for Wolsey. And so I'm really conflicted about how is Cromwell playing both sides of this in terms of Catholicism versus Protestantism. It's just strange to me. The practical answer to me about his staying in London and not going to see Wolsey is, in my mind, both his desire to preserve self-preservation, because he feels like he knows Wolsey's gone, and if I go on his team, I'm gone with him. But it's also, I think, his ability to say, you know what, I have a chance to save Wolsey. I could be part of the mediation between Henry and Anne and Wolsey if I stay here and work to advance Wolsey's message, and the fact that Wolsey's not the problem. Wolsey's caught between the Pope and the King. He's trying to just walk that same tightrope.
Very good. Tom and Allison, you had wanted to say something.
Yeah, the thing that I recall from the book that I think was important for Cromwell and kind of
Could you move closer to your microphone? It'd be easier to hear you.
Sure. The thing that I remember that struck me at the time when I was reading that I thought was important in terms of Cromwell sort of beginning to make the switch was joining the Parliament. That gives him a sort of a forum and an existence that's not completely tied to Wolsey. And it gives him an entree with a lot of people who are not Wolsey. But also his sort of courting of Anne, I think, is important.
Yes.
Those things, I think, allow him to make the switch. Seemed to me, it was almost imperceptible. It was totally seamless.
Yeah, I was very interested in Anne's role in all this. In fact, people were talking about the view of Henry, and Henry as like certainly was very able in many ways, but as an absolute monarch. I think there's scenes in here where really Anne has him twisted around her little finger, and he doesn't look very absolute at all. There's that scene where he gives money to Thomas Cromwell to give to Wolsey, and I think he says something too, like, give him my regards, or, here's some money. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell Anne, right? And don't tell her relatives that I'm doing this. So, like, to some extent, he's being, pushed to the wall in a way that Henry isn't completely comfortable with. So I don't see him as acting, totally independently. And of course, this whole scene gives more credence to why Cromwell thinks there's, some reason to stay at court and try to, be involved in this relationship between the king and Anne, that he might be able to do some good and prevent worse harm. And as for the Cardinal Wolsey being, like this idea of the Catholic Church versus the Protestant Church. Okay, Wolsey certainly is not going to abandon the Catholic Church. Very true. And his basic problem is, the Pope. He can't completely tell the Pope where to get off. But as a Protestant, for a Protestant looking at somebody in the Catholic Church, Wolsey is probably as good as it gets, because they make these comments about Wolsey would burn books, but not burn men. He's not actively trying to suppress the Protestant faith or people's individual choices of conscience, or their ability to read books that are circulating, unless he's pushed to it, I think.
Well, I want to respond a little bit both to what Michael said and to what you just said. Something that I think is good to remember, and Alicia, you can certainly jump in because you are literally Catholic and I am just me. But in this time, you have called Catholics, is what I would say, people who feel a calling to that faith, and you have bureaucratic Catholics. And I think the reason Cromwell gets along with Wolsey is because Wolsey is a bureaucratic Catholic. He's not a called Catholic. I think Cromwell could never work for Thomas More, who is a called Catholic. And sort of that, the way they use faith and think about power are very different. Let's see. Tally, you would like to say something. I'm getting to you too, Cheryl, soon. I promise.
Have to remember what we were talking about when I said that. I have one quick question. What is a baited gull?
So you would put gulls in cages to attract other birds for killing.
Okay.
Yeah. It's
All
almost
right, cool.
exactly what it says on the tin.
I couldn't understand why you would do it, but okay, that makes sense.
I mean, it's not my thing to do on a Saturday, but different times.
So last time we met, there's one line that I really liked in the section that we finished before. What was it, part 2?
Mm-hmm.
And that quote you were reading made me think of it. It's right at the beginning of Make or Mar. It says, "All Hallows Day, grief comes in waves. Now it threatens to capsize him. He doesn't believe that the dead come back, but that doesn't stop him from feeling the brush of their wingtips against his shoulder." I really like that. And that definitely seems related to what Mantell was saying in your quote. And then there's a scene in this one towards the end of The Dead Complain of Their Burial, where he's thinking back to when the cardinal was kicked out of his house and the people were going through his clothes and his vestments, and I don't know. That sort of reminded me of that same scene. "Freed, the cloth drifted against the air, dazzling white, fine as a moth's wing. But the floating angels had been packed away in lavender."
When we talk about Mantell as a writer, one of the things that she is brilliant at is she, I may have mentioned this in an email, but I'll just say it out loud here. She uses motifs almost as one would in an opera. So wings come up a lot. And the fact that he feels the presence of the dead as wings. And we also know that his daughter had a beautiful pair of wings that were made for her that she insisted on wearing. So just pay attention often to wings. There's another great line earlier in this section that we're reading where Cromwell is remembering that Wolsey tells him, always find out what someone is wearing under their clothes. And as you read through the novel, you're going to see clothes from other people show up on other people, or you're going to see rings that belong to one person that are now on another person. So I think she's just masterful at doing that. So sorry, Anne. Anne is telling me that I'm fading in and out, so I apologize if that's happening for everyone else. Okay, Jeffrey, you wanted to say something.
I think Tally, you are. Thank you. To return to why people like Cromwell, and part of it is I think, to use the casual definition of code switch, he does this for every single person. He is sort of the good opponent when he's with Anne. He is sort of the genial person who's not going to force Henry to enter any conversation that he doesn't really want to have. Like, for instance, that when Henry says, is £1,000 enough to settle this thing with for the second, and he's like, Henry doesn't want me to press the issue at this point. He just wants me to be profuse in my thanks. When he's with Thomas More, they have that sort of tete-a-tete where they're definitely ideologically at odds, but they can be very polite and sort of charismatic about it, as much as Thomas More can ever be charismatic. The only time I think we really see him at a loss is that barge ride with Gardner, and you see Cromwell racking his brain for all of the things he knows about Gardner and what they might talk about, and he happens upon something, but he's like, it's probably not worth it. And that's the only time they really has like an awkward barge ride with someone where he isn't able to charm and be that sort of that person who his interlocutor needs him to be or wants him to be.
I want to color something in that you said, Jeff, just because it shows up. There was somebody had asked me a question in an email about Norfolk and his relationship with Cromwell, because at one point Norfolk says something along the lines of, you're in Parliament and that's good. And I think what's being said there is Norfolk feels fine. We get him in Parliament, he will stop climbing. That's as high as he's going to go, because Norfolk's favorite thing to call Cromwell is a person. So you're not aristocracy, you're not royalty, you're not a member of the court, you're a person. Why are you such a person? And that becomes a recurring motif. Cheryl, you had wanted to say something. You have to come off mute to do it.
Okay, so I wanted to share some thoughts I had about Cromwell and his presence at the court. I think he did it in part, he wanted to be so present to advance Wolsey's cause, would be part of it. I think also at that, he's sort of avoiding Wolsey for a while because I think it's too painful for him to see Wolsey's decline. Wolsey almost becomes a child in a sense and very dependent upon Cromwell to kind of bring him crumbs of what he can gather at court. Wolsey is so hungry for approval and trying to get back into the good graces of Henry. And I think it's painful for Cromwell to see this man who, father figure, mentor, to be so powerless. So I think he would avoid him at times because of that, but continuing to do what he can to advance him in Henry's regard. I think Henry would as you say, because Henry was very dependent on Wolsey, because Wolsey is probably a lot more insightful, sophisticated than many of the other people that he has around him advising him. And now Wolsey is banished, but knowing that Cromwell has been sort of trained by Wolsey, then he would want, he might want, Henry will come to depend on Cromwell, because he can, for one thing, Cromwell is willing to challenge Henry and other people won't. So I think Henry welcomes that. And then just one thing in terms of Cromwell as a person, I think the fact that, he was abused, he was neglected as a child, and then running away from his father and having to make it on his own from such an early age. One of the things you have to learn in order to survive is how to read people and how to please them. He's also very smart, so he's able to do these things. So he's always able to use his wits, because that's all he has in order to survive. And because he's been exposed, as others have said, to so many different kinds of people, has known people in all walks of life, he's just got so much more knowledge and a lot more resources than other people will have, because he doesn't have, he hasn't been in sort of a stable environment all these years.
Thank you, Cheryl. Dom.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Sorry for being late today. I had the wrong time, wrong book club. I just wanted to bring up something you asked. You were asking a question earlier about, or you referenced earlier, Roman Catholicism. I'm in sort of like the unique position of having actually been through a annulment of a marriage, Roman Catholic annulment of a marriage after 25 years, and bearing 3 children, not mine. So I sort of like been through the process in the present day. I can't say it relates back to this period, but what that showed me, that experience, I saw the paperwork, I saw the questions that were being asked by the authorities, and the annulment, and it was granted. What it represented to me was the incredible, I always have a hard time pronouncing this word, compartmentalization that is fundamental to the, in my mind, to the Catholic perspective. That is, you can think I think that at least modern day Catholics, and maybe Catholics back then, were brought up to be able to think 2 contrary things at the same time and digest them with no problem whatsoever. It's so that the ability of somebody like Wolsey, or for that matter, even Tom, to be thinking differently about different issues depending upon what role they're playing at the moment, I think was part of the religion itself. It doesn't strike me as being reflective of some kind of inconsistency or some moral inconsistency, so much as simply you're playing at certain times you're playing a certain role. Cromwell to me is just the epitome of a real politician. He plays real politics all the time, And you can be humane and at the same time know what your place in the life, in the world is, what your place in the structure is, and you act accordingly. And having been brought up, given that he was brought up in this church, he and he's also very smart. He's inherently smart. And has seen as much as he has, more so than other people. I think that he can think two different things or three different things for that matter at the same time, and it's not a reflection of him being necessarily devious. It's just that he can come. A Catholic, and today, as perhaps back then, has an ability to compartmentalize and think and act accordingly. I think it's just that's just my perspective on how religion affects this story, and the ability of the actors to do what they can. Remember, Henry really believes that he is not married to Catherine. I mean, it's not something he's making up. Now, I was brought up to think that he was making it up, but one thing that Mantell is showing me in this book is that no, you can look at it from a different perspective. He really believes it. He's not making it up. That's all I have to say.
Antonia Fraser makes a great point in one of her books about the wives. It's a tiny defense of Henry where she says, we know Henry's going to be married 6 times, but Henry doesn't know that Henry is going to be married 6 times. And each time he marries, he really, well, except maybe for Anne of Cleves, but each time he marries, he believes it's for love. And then he's disappointed. Let's see, Phyllis, you had asked to.
I have to run, so everybody, bye. See you in a couple
Lovely
of weeks.
to see you.
Yes, lovely to see you too as well. And I will be watching very closely and wishing you all the best of luck in the next couple of days of vote counting. Bye.
Bye.
Oh,
Phyllis.
sure. And how do we get to Canada?
I'll help
you. Yeah, just a few points that occurred to me. Henry is lonely. He doesn't have anyone who can really talk to him. The people he has in his circle, his friends from a long time ago, they're hunting buddies. They're, bros with him. And he appreciates that, but he misses Wolsey's intellect and play. And so when Cromwell comes in, he says, talk to me, Cromwell. I want, I'm missing that. And that actually might be one of the things he gets from Anne. She has very subtle intellect. So that besides whatever her. And the other thing about Anne is that she was raised in France. And so she has a level of sophistication, just as Cromwell does, from the continent that the English bumpkin ladies don't have. She dances beautifully, and she has, she dresses well, and she has charms. She knows how to work a room, those kinds of hostess skills if she wants to.
She knows how to read a book.
Knows how to read.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And she, knows how to get people to feel like she's actually listening to them, which I think is a skill that a lot of the English ladies don't have. And as far as leaving Wolsey, I think there's a very touching scene, I think, when he leaves him and Wolsey is going, I forget, is he going north at that point? But, they don't have to speak because they both understand what they mean to each other and what he is, so they don't have to like embrace, oh, I'm leaving you. And Wolsey's only hope is Cromwell in court, doing things, sending him things, trying to rehabilitate him, working him loans, working him money, working him plates and cups. And the other thing is that as far as are their minds different than ours? I don't know what Julian James says, but I've come to think that the awareness, and while there's a zeitgeist with each culture, I think underlying our consciousness has been the same for all the way back. And so the cultures are different, but I mean, Shakespeare, I mean, subtlety of mind and intellect and analysis of things and how people interact. It's a little later than Cromwell, but not that late, you know, 30 years or something. So I think the minds of the people then, while their cultural assumptions are different, certainly their ability to negotiate complicated things and their interactions with each other, I think we just have to say they're like ours, I think.
I would highly recommend if you're a fast reader and you love to have books around and you're interested in this time period, there's a book called Religion and the Decline of Magic. And it's by, I was going to say Kevin James, but he's Paul Mart, blah, blah. Shoot. I'll get you the author.
That's enough information to find a book these days.
Perfect. And just a slight pushback on your assumption, Phyllis. One of the things that is very different about a 16th century mind is a belief in magic and a willingness to put faith into it. So we're dealing with sort of a teetering rational world at this point. And so the mind is a little different, I think. We are maybe we're always pre-rational. Maybe we're never rational. Maybe that's where we end up.
There's a wonderful Carl Sagan quote about what's going on. It's predicting the situation now, and it addresses that point. That when you start devaluing science and logic and intellect, then and valuing crystals and astrology, then you end up with perhaps the situation that we have half the country buying of that, and so it makes me think that awareness and consciousness really is not different. There is a great deal of magical thinking, a great deal of much more than I would have thought 4 days ago.
Jeffrey Hearn, you want to talk about stitching, and I'm excited about
Yes. That. So we hear that Cromwell has moved the needle from, I guess his ward is sewing. He moves the needle to her non-dominant hand, and her stitching is sort of weird and unique enough that it makes a good tamper-proof seal in sealing his letters to Wolsey. I tried for a long time to Google sort of, medieval or Tudor era correspondence security. If anyone has any other information about how they might have done this, how do you seal a letter at that period so it can't be read by anyone but the recipient? Please talk, because I am fascinated by it.
I have you covered, Jeffrey. I'll send you some information.
Oh.
Okay. Well, I'll send it to everyone, not just Jeffrey, but Jeffrey definitely will get the information. So I'm going to call on Ann Asher, who had asked us to with your mouth. Is she on mute? It's ironic that she's on mute since she keeps saying she can't hear me. You're on mute, Anne. Does anybody lip read?
I think it's so, that was definitely, that was on my list.
Um,
That was really.
maybe we should just all make nodding faces so she feels heard. Great points, Anne. I'm going to move on to Marion, and then maybe we'll come back.
Okay. Okay, so I want to sort of backtrack to the conversation about how Cromwell kind of changes his ways to fit into whoever he's speaking to and fit in that way. And I had just come across like a very minor conversation that really struck me because he not only speaks to people, but there's a meaning or a conversation going below the actual words he's saying. I was thinking of when he goes to see Moore and Gardner is there, and they're talking about Moore's son-in-law, who's kind of thinking about Lutheranism, and Gardner says he'll come back to the church by the time they bring in the currants and gooseberries. And then someone else says something, and then Cromwell just says, it's not really a good year for soft fruit. And it's like, he's giving them a message there without really saying the message out loud. And that just really struck me as, wow, this guy's operating on several levels. So
very, very brilliant. And yeah, the thing you said about the words under the word sort of matches perfectly with Wolsey saying, look at what people wear under their clothes. So thank you for that. Anne, are you able to be off mute yet?
Yeah, I unmuted myself. Sorry, folks.
It's all right.
Okay, I was hitting the wrong button. Anyway, there seems to be three sides on the religion issue. Henry, who is sort of an unwilling Protestant. I mean, he was perfectly happy to be Catholic as long as the Pope would do what he wanted. But of course, since he'd gotten a dispensation to marry Catherine, it was kind of weird that he now has decided she's not his wife anymore. And therefore, the whole thing was, they were never married. But he is still opposed to things like having the Bible in English or any of the other Protestant things. And then there is Cromwell, who is really a Protestant. And then, of course, there's the Catholic Church. So it's a kind of a three-way thing. And then the other non sequitur, which I have, is if you ever go to the Frick Museum in New York, you will see placed side by side portraits of Cromwell and Moore by Holbein, I think.
Mhm.
All right, Allison, you are next, and then Alicia, and then we're going to say goodnight to each other.
Okay. I was going to say, Tom and I, a few days ago, heard a talk by a historian, whose name I don't remember, sorry, about Thomas Cromwell. And she was saying that his childhood wasn't really that bad, and saying that Hillary made it so bad to make him a more sympathetic character. But I only know what she said, okay? I did not delve further into this, but I thought I did have one reaction to that, which is that was sort of an oversimplification, because it seemed like, if anything, what she was doing was trying to make him more receptive to this father-son relationship that he had with Wolsey. Wolsey didn't really have biological sons, and
He did have one. He had a son and a
he
daughter.
had a son. I thought he just had a daughter. Oh, well.
He had both a son and a daughter.
Well, whatever. All right. I feel like laughing or something, right? Okay, like whatever. But anyway, the other thing I wanted to say was I was very fascinated, like by this whole thing about how Cromwell ends up getting in position and sort of in this section is moving towards, for reasons that we've all touched upon, becoming a substitute for Henry to Cardinal Wolsey. And I thought it was so interesting that the first part of this section, I love chapter titles. I love names of things. And we spent a lot of time trying to figure out like why things have the names that they do. And the 3-card trick, okay, that one section is called that. Yeah, and of course it's obvious that that's what he did on the street when he didn't have back in the day when he had no means of support, and that's how he supported himself. But if you think about what the 3-card trick is, it's substitution essentially, right? And this section is about substitution. It's or attempted substitution primarily of Anne Boleyn for Queen Catherine, and now substitution of Thomas Cromwell for Cardinal Wolsey.
Very smart. Alicia, bring us home.
I want to go back to the section that we had to read for today. And I think there's 2 huge things in it. One of which is that everyone's been discussing Cromwell's relationship with his son. And to me, it's when he realizes his son has gentleman's hands.
Yes.
And he never has had to chop wood, shoe a horse, and he never will. And I think that it's like you always want better for your son, but at the same time, your offspring, but at the same time, it's almost as though they're aliens to you. I think that. And then the other thing that happens in this part of the book is when all of the Anne's boyfriends, lovers, admirers, whatever, they get dressed up as Cardinal Wolsey and the devil. And there are 4 of them, 1 for each leg. And then there's that whole thing with Patch, where Cromwell confronts the fool, like, how could you do this? Because at one, like last time we met, you were all hysterical because you had to leave the cardinal. So I don't know. I think it's a really important part of the book.
What I will tell people now is really pay attention and remember that play with the cardinal and each of the demons pulling a leg, because that is going to be big in the second book.
Oh, and also he gets to overhear Mark Seaton speaking in Flemish, giving, like truth or consequences or truth or dare. What's that game where you say what you really think about people? And I think that's,
It's called being a Baptist.
And then back to Cromwell's religion. The only clue we have of his interest, his own personal interest in religion, is his association with these dissidents that are reading the Bible in English. For him to be with these people is treason. It is dangerous. And if he just wanted a good conversation, he could go over to Thomas More's house. So I think, though we never get an insight into his own personal or spiritual life, the fact that he knows Tyndall and all these people is incredible.
Yeah.
Risky. It's like being he's like a closet Protestant.
Yeah.
Or a communist in the 50s.
Yes. Yeah. He's a mole.
So some things we didn't talk about tonight, but I will make sure to mention in the email, just points that I thought were really fascinating and add a lot of interesting depth. Mary Boleyn's attempted seduction of Thomas Cromwell to hide a pregnancy, and how heartbreaking that was when Cromwell realizes that he dodged something that he didn't know. I'm not making any sense about that, but I found that fascinating. They also, Yes, he criticizes the monasteries very heavily because the monastery. So the problem with the Catholic Church in England at this time, from a pocketbook point of view, is money that would have been going to Henry and his accounts is instead going to monasteries, where it is being squandered at the monasteries. And then a percentage of that money is also being sent to Rome. So in a sense, England is funneling income that should go to the crown, so the crown can use it to protect England. It's going to, yes, my cat is actually named for Count Fosco. So yes, favorite. Anyway, so there's that. The dinner scene with Thomas More and just how horribly cruel he is to his family is fascinating. And we had talked earlier about Cromwell's gentleness with Gregory, and you sort of realize if Gregory was a Moor, boy, would he not be treated well. Like that, he would have been made fun of for all of that. And then finally, just the growing relationship between Henry and Cromwell, and that there's that fascinating point that Mantell makes through Cromwell, where Henry says, "Can we talk alone?" And Cromwell says, "He's never been alone." Like alone to him means something very different than alone to me would mean. Like alone for Cromwell is literally alone where no one else can see you, whereas Henry has someone in the toilet with him. And just, I can't wrap my head around what that life must be like. All right. Thank you very much for spending tonight with me on this conversation, which I deeply loved. I will have the recording up if anybody wants to rewatch, in case you missed something. I will send links to some lectures that Hilary Mantel gave that I think are useful. I will also send you my marginalia again, because why not? And we can keep the conversation going via email, and I'll share stuff. Like if you send me something, I'll make sure to send it back out to the group. So we all get a chance to talk, but I'm also trying to protect your emails so that people don't just email you out of the blue that you don't know, except for me.
Do you save the chat, Mike? Do you save the chat?
The chat is saved for me, and I can certainly include that as well. And especially, I'm noticing tonight we use the chat a lot in a way that I'm very happy about. So I'll make sure that is also there. Yeah, no politics at all in 1530.
Good night and thank you. And yeah.
Good night. And we will see each other in 2 weeks.
Okay.
We will be through section 4.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Very good. Thanks.